these rabbets here on the side of the case, we have to protect them too. So instead of worrying about taping them up with blue tape, which really is going to be tricky on the side pieces, because if you think about it, the side piece goes on here. This outside edge, that's a glue surface, that's very easy to cover up with tape. But on the inside edge, right here, there's a little piece where this rabbet, the inside face of that rabbet, covers. And that would need to be taped and protected also, but that's going to be really hard to get the tape in exactly the right position. So my solution is to sort of do a pre-early assembly like this, put everything together, use clamps, clamp it all together, and I just won't put the bottom in, because now I could reach my hand all the way in, I could get under, have it on some sawhorses and get in from underneath and get complete coverage, but the box is assembled, so I don't have to worry about taping off these rabbet joints. All I have to tape off is this bottom section right here, where the bottom panel goes. And this is really easy to do. Just get a piece of tape, try to fold it roughly in half. And what we want is that center of the tape to be in the center of the groove, which can be tricky if you don't fold it in half like that. Okay, and then just use your finger to push it into the corner on one side and then into the corner on the other, and that will also protect the sides. It's a great way to protect the groove. So after spraying the inside of the case, I have all the parts separated and I'm ready to start the actual case glue up. Now, this can be done in a number of different ways. The way I feel most comfortable doing it is actually one corner at a time. And the reason is because of the joint that we're using at the corner here. This reinforced rabbet doesn't have its reinforcement yet. So all we're really doing is placing it in here, and it's not really all that strong of a joint, and it doesn't sort of self-lock in place. It means we've got to be pretty careful about how we clamp it down to make sure we get a good wood-to-wood contact and get a good glue bond there. So I'm doing one corner at a time. You can see I've got one of the long ends clamped down to the bench, just clamped on one side, and I'm going to attach one side at a time. I also have a scrap piece of ply, which is the same thickness as my bottom piece. I'm going to use that sort of as a guide just to double check and make sure I'm in the alignment that I think I'm in. And then we can install the actual bottom piece later on in this process. So let's add some glue, get some clamps on this thing, and get it clamped up. And a nice bead of glue. Any extra glue on that rabbet there, I'm just going to add to this piece. Okay, got a couple clamps at the ready. Insert my bottom piece just to keep me lined up. I'm also going to use my fingers as reference on the top and bottom just to make sure the joint is exactly where I think it is. I'm going to start by adding one right in the center. And do your best to keep it square, and we'll have a chance to square it up a little bit more later. Keep your dead blow handy because you're going to need to tap it one way or the other. Okay, so far so good. Now, even though I have this piece here to sort of line up my groove for the bottom panel, it's not necessarily going to make sure that this side panel is completely square to the other panel. So that's what we're going to use these little guys for. These are from Woodpeckers, but Rockler sells something like it too. They're plastic. And you basically just clamp it on both corners, and that's going to keep everything nice and square while the glue dries. Okay, and now I can add some more reinforcement, clamp downward. Now another thing to be careful with, especially if you're working with oak like I am, that glue, if it contacts the oak and the metal of your clamps at the same time, you will end up with a very deep black colored stain. And that is not something you want to find the next day after you've done a big glue up. So it's a good idea to put something in between the metal and the wood itself to make sure that that does not happen. Okay, so all I've done here is added another clamp this way with a little shim of wood on top to push that top piece in. Make sure I have a nice tight fit. Now, it may seem like I went through a lot of work to get this one corner clamped on properly, but when I'm doing a reinforced rabbet, I really like to get that corner as tight as possible before I add any reinforcement. And that way, after everything is dry and the corner is nice and secure, then I can add my reinforcement, and it just makes the rest of the glue up that much easier. So the rest of them won't be nearly as troublesome as this particular one, because right now we don't really have any frame of reference. We're just putting two pieces together at a 90-degree angle. But after this, it'll be much easier.
I drop in the pre-finished bottom panel and then place some glue into the rabbet. The side panel then drops in place easily, and the bottom panel helps to register it into position. Now I clamp everything down and make sure it stays nice and square. When I notice that I'm slightly off from 90 degrees, I can vary the angle of the clamp itself to make a slight adjustment. This is a good alternative to using the square brackets that I used before. Here's how I take care of the squeeze out. I get the bulk with a paper towel, and then I come back with a moist towel to clean it up a little bit further. And finally, a putty knife wrapped in another paper towel gets the remaining glue that's deep in that corner. And since the wood is pre-finished, this cleanup has absolutely no negative effect on the wood or the finish itself. Once the glue dries, I can add the final panel. I find the easiest way to do this is to have a few clamps open and in position. So all I have to do is add the glue, drop the panel in, and apply clamping pressure. My bottom panel has a slight bow to it, so I need to bottom out one side first and then work my way across to the other side. And one final check for squareness. If everything was square prior to this point, this should just be a formality.
Now while the glue dries on the main body of the trunk, let's focus on the lid. Now the lid on this thing is really no different than the rest of the piece itself as far as just having a simple frame and panel construction, except for this one has 3 panels. And you could use that alone as a lid, but it would be very thin, it wouldn't really fit the look of the piece, and it wouldn't be that strong. So what we're going to do is build it up a little bit. So here's a frame that we're going to use to do just that. And imagine, you see this rabbet all the way around. Imagine dropping one of the frame and panels right inside there. And that's the basic construction concept. There's really nothing different than what we've done before. Now looking a little bit closer at this frame though, you'll see we've got a rabbet that goes all the way around, and that's fine on the sides. It's very simple. It's a through rabbet all the way across. Oops. On the front and back though, we not only have that through rabbet across, but we also have on the side here another rabbet that allows the side piece of the frame to fit in just like so. Okay, and that's really one of the small construction details that you should just be aware of, but this is really not that difficult to do. Once you're set up for doing the long ones, all you have to do is turn the piece to the side, use your miter gauge, and run it across, and you'll be able to get these as well. Now the first part of this glue up, and again, you know, I like to really simplify things as much as possible to get the most accurate results and to reduce the number of variables in the process. Because if I reduce the variables, I reduce my chances of screwing something up. So the side pieces of our frame that's going to drop in, these guys will go right along here, and they happen to be the exact same length as the side pieces of the frame. And they go into the rabbet like so. So I'm thinking, let's glue those up ahead of time, and that's one less thing I really have to worry about. Once these are glued up and in place, then I could sort of dry clamp the whole frame together, and I'll be able to get my length measurement on these cross rails that go here. I don't really want to cut them until this is glued together because I want to make sure that that fit is absolutely dead on. So these pieces are milled, cut, the The grooves are all cut and milled in place, but I'm not going to cut them to length yet. They're a little bit oversized, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So let's start by gluing these side pieces together.
A little glue, a little brushy. Put the pieces together and add some clamping pressure. And if you're like me, you'll add lots of clamping pressure.
All right, and now I'm going to take those two glue ups that we just did, now that these are dry, and kind of do a dry fit on the frame. One clamp is about all it's going to take here to close that joint up. And now I'll be able to take my measurements for all of my cross rails for the frame.
With the rails and panels cut, I can assemble the top at warp speed. And to ensure appropriate spacing, I cut a few spacers out of scrap ply. With the glue on the tenons only, I add the pre-assembled sides and clamp everything down. After that dries, I glue in the long pieces of the frame. It should be a pretty snug fit. And of course, I add plenty of clamping pressure.
Now once your top is glued up, you could drop it on the base and just analyze the fit. And guess what? Mine is far from perfect. Admittedly, I rushed this project a little bit. I really wanted to squeeze this in time to help Dwayne out. And unfortunately, I just did not pay attention enough at certain steps. And I'll explain what those are in a second. But really, I was hesitant to even talk about this stuff because I just saw it as me being completely careless. I know these were preventable things. But at the same time, these are also things that someone coming into the craft might not be aware of, that they need to spend that extra special time on. So I think it is important for you to see where I've screwed up and how I'm going to fix it. So ultimately, the best thing to do is just make the top again. And if this is for a paying customer or it's the end-all be-all project for you, you may want to do that. But for me, I think I could do a few quick repairs that are really going to make a difference in the final fit and finish of the piece. So let's take a look, a real close look at some of the things that I see that we're going to have to fix. In the front here, we have a little bit of a bow. Okay, I know that the case is flat, so the top has a little bit of a bow in it. In the center, it's about 1/16 of an inch, so we're going to have to fix that. Why would this happen? My guess is possibly excessive clamping pressure here caused it to bow a little bit. Perhaps that bow was in the wood before I glued it up and just didn't notice it. But again, prevented by making sure you put a straight edge on your parts as you're gluing them up and also before you glue them up to make sure that they're straight and square. Now this is something that I really could kick myself for. There's a bow in the front across this way. So if I put a straight edge here, we've got roughly 1/16 of an inch bow in the center here, okay? So that's another thing that was completely preventable. And in fact, I can kick myself on this one because I knew that that bow was in there. I just hoped that during the clamping process we could straighten it out, but no dice. It has the bow and we need to fix it. So the final thing has to do with the squareness of the whole piece. Whether it's the base or the top that's slightly out of square, at this point it really doesn't matter. I just have to figure out how to get them to be exactly the same. So I've got maybe a 32nd of an inch overhang here and another 32nd over on the front left. And here are perfect. So basically something is not in sync with the other. Bottom line is just a few passes with a plane on this back corner, and on the front corner over here we'll smooth that out. And that's actually a pretty typical thing because on a case this big you're just bound to have at least a degree of error here or there, and it shouldn't take more than a quick trim to clean that up. Now, this may seem a little crazy, but the easiest way to straighten out the front and get rid of that bow is to use the joiner. If you have a joiner plane, go ahead and use that too. I happen to have one, but I think this is going to be quicker. And now, just to be sure that we still maintain a nice parallel edge, I'm going to take the freshly jointed side and I'm going to put it up against the fence and run the whole lid through the table saw to make sure that other side is still perfectly parallel. We're not really removing a lot of material here, just anything that's sticking out too far. So now with the bow taken out, you can see there's a nice even ledge in the back. Now we don't want that ledge, but we can see that it's even thickness all the way across. So what we need to do, and this is where extra material comes in handy. Here's a piece that was just sort of an extra panel. I can cut this into a strip, glue that strip onto the back here, and then trim it to the exact size that we need. And then that bow is not a problem anymore. The key here, though, is to make sure that the end grain of the piece you use is closely matched to the end grain of this piece that represents the top of the rabbit here. If you don't do that, it's a little bit harder to hide that joint there. But if you do get the grain matched up pretty close, that's going to be a pretty flawless repair.
A good coat of glue and a lot of clamps.
Now our trim piece is dry and we can cut off the excess tabs on the side here. Obviously I had that one started already. And now using a block plane, I could trim the material that's sitting proud of the surface, smooth that out. Now with the extra material on the front, all we need to do is take it back to the table saw and trim it to the appropriate width. Okay, so now we're going to trim the bottom of this to make sure we get at least most of that bow out of there. Remember, it was about a 1/16 of an inch, I think. So using a straight edge, I can verify exactly where it is, and I know in the center here it's a little bit low. So I need to remove material here and here, but then as a result, on the side rails as well, otherwise it's not going to sit flat. So the first thing I want to do, because as I come across here with my plane, I'm going to hit end grain on the rail here. So I want to make sure that I don't have any chances of really chipping things out. So I'm going to, ahead of time, remove some of this material here. I always want this to be just a couple steps ahead of the rest of this. And do it on this side for good measure, because I still can chip out. Okay, now I'm going to go to my number 7. And a nice long sole on this allows me to skip right over this low section, but only hit the high parts. See, now we're not hitting anything. We'll contact some more material right at the end. Okay. Now I'm starting to hit more material on the side, so I got to be a little bit more careful. Getting much, much closer now. Oh yeah. Trim a little bit more. I think this next pass should do it. Oops. Helps if I hold it flat. Okay. I am pretty satisfied with that, my friends. I'm going to hit the other side now. I've moved everything around here. Okay, so now that I've taken material off the front and the back rail, I need to take the material off of the side. And because of that little block planing action I did over here, I really shouldn't have to hit the corners. I probably just have a high spot right here in the middle, and that's what we're after. So that's exactly what we're seeing here. Now I've got the lid back in the trunk, and this is how I'm going to check my progress. In the front, now I have a little teeny tiny gap, but it's even all the way across. In the back, it's perfectly flush. Now on the sides, I see it's perfectly flush here, but I've got a little bit of a gap in the back and a little bit of a gap in the front, which just tells me I need to do a few more passes right here on the side. But the cool thing is now, looking at the side itself, I can just put a pencil mark and actually mark the locations that I see as the start and stop points of the material that I need to remove. Do the same thing on this side, and they're roughly equivalent on both sides. Not that much has to come off. But the important thing to see here is even though I'm primarily a power tool workshop, having that number 7 around and of course a good block plane, it's indispensable for something like this because really what other tool would have been able to pull this off as accurately and as cleanly as we're able to do it here with as much control, without going too far. So, some of these hand tools, you really should stock up on them when you see a good price because they're worth having around. All right, so the final thing is trimming up that little bit of extra material on both sides, about a 32nd of an inch. I would love to use my number 7 for this. The problem is my bench was poorly designed from day one, and I didn't really start getting serious about hand tools, and especially bigger hand tools that require force and momentum like this guy does, until probably a year ago. So my bench is not exactly suitable for the task. So what I'm going to do is a power tool solution for this, because while I couldn't really come up with a good power tool solution for flattening the bottom of the lid, I have a good one for cleaning up these sides, and it involves a circular saw. Now, even if you don't have a Festool system, this is still something you can do with a regular circular saw and a good straight edge. And all I'm really going to do is put my straight edge along that cut line, which is now off from 90 degrees. That's the whole point. Something was at a square. We just basically want to follow the desired cut line, which takes a little bit of material off the back edge. And all I need to do is line up my splinter guard here, and I'll be able to do that. So it is very easy on the Festool system, but certainly is something still possible with a standard circular saw and a straight edge. Okay, so right here, you can see this back piece here is where we put on our extra piece of oak that we had to build up and then saw it again. So this darker stripe here is actually 2 pieces, okay? You can't really see it because the joint's nice and tight and the grain was selected in such a way that it would look like it all came from the same piece of wood. And same thing on the end grain, it's really not noticeable. Now, other than a saw mark here, which I'm going to have to sand out, the side is very flush, the fit is good, there's no gap here. It's just about as airtight as you could want it to be, which also continues along the back. It's a nice, even joint. Okay, and on the front of the piece, you can see we've got a little hairline gap that's pretty consistent all the way across. Certainly a heck of a lot better than that 1/8 of an inch gap that we were dealing with before, so got to be happy with that. Now I'm pretty pleased with the way this top came out considering the number of things that I had to repair, and this was a pretty big screw up on my part. I dropped the ball is the bottom line. Now, in the course of your work, you are going to confront situations where you make these mistakes. Now, obviously, as woodworkers, our goal is to get better at doing things so that we don't make mistakes. But you can see, just being careless, not paying enough attention, I let my guard down and something like this was allowed to happen. But the thing is, you have to be prepared for those situations and have the skill set necessary to repair them, because that skill set is not only good for repairs, it's good for the techniques as well. There's a lot of techniques where you want to be able to flatten a board that's not straight. You want to be able to accurately dimension something that's this size and shape, and you need to know how to use the planes to do it, or how to use your circular saw with the straight edge to do something like that. So they're transferable skills, and it's really important for us to have those. And it's also important not to freak out when we make a big mistake, because a lot of these things are repairable. And honestly, these repairs, I don't think anybody else is ever going to see them. You know it, I know it, and anybody who I tell about it is going to know. But I think if I showed this to Nicole right now, she would be very hard-pressed to find any flaw in the top. And that just comes down to tight joinery and just making sure you pick the grain so that it looks like it belongs there. So, you're just going to have to make those decisions for yourself when the time comes that an error rears its ugly head in the shop. You have to decide, should you repair it? Can you repair it? You have to know whether the repair is going to look good enough. But again, it's just a very personal decision. And sometimes you have no choice but to make a new part. There are just some pieces that are too important and too vital to the look of the piece that you just don't want to risk with, doing some kind of a repair. Maybe a glue joint will show up in the wrong place, and it's just not worth it.